Welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about prayer, and I wanted to teach you a process of prayer that I developed from modeling the Kahuna of Hawaii. So, now before I get started, there's more than one way that you can see prayer. If you want to see it from a psychological standpoint, you can see it as a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you are deeply aligned with something, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we explain this through neurolinguistic programming, that there's a flood of information that's coming through the senses continuously. And you, with your filters, your reticular activating system in the base of the brain, you pick and choose just a handful. It's like a waterfall of information is coming to you through the five senses continuously, and you are just grasping at straws. You're just trying to gather as much as you can to make a coherent whole, and that image, that map that you create, is projected on the mind inside, and that's what you call reality. But it's not. It's just a fistful of dollars, right? It's just a handful of what's actually there. And that's how you and your sibling can experience the same moment in your past and remember it completely differently, because you actually lived two separate moments. It was not one moment. You both grasped at the river of information and you came away with something that is slightly different. And sometimes you can be like, no, that never happened, because you were grasping at something totally different. And the last explanation is that there are higher brain waves at a higher frequency. And those brain waves, when they go into action, create exponential results compared to a slower brain wave. Okay, and those brain waves have more potential to interact with other brain waves to assist you in whatever your goal might be, whatever your prayer might be. So there's four explanations. You can see it as a blessing from your higher self, from angels, from God. You can see it as psychological. You can see it in neurolinguistic programming, and you can see it as a manifestation of brainwaves. Lots of options. My first real experience with real prayer, with understanding that I could pray and get an answer, that first happened when I was a kid, and I had been reading Ken Keyes Jr. I had been learning his method of affirmation. Down the street, the neighbor's cat was near death, I heard. And I thought, I'm going to pray for this cat. So I spent the night using Ken Keyes Jr. affirmation process as a prayer formula. And the next day, the cat was up and out the door like nothing had ever happened. So it was really the first time that I had prayed and found that there was an answer from the higher self that really hit home with me. And I took that to heart, that this process worked. And the way his affirmation process worked, it was really brilliant, because he had a deep understanding that you have to get through the subconscious mind into the higher mind. He really had a good grasp of that. And that really comes down to two things which he was doing. So the first was that he would use a very small affirmation. So I see people praying, and they're kind of, rambling. There's this, and there's this, and there's this, and I want to talk to you about this. And that's good. Maybe we take things off of our heart when we're talking to the higher self, whatever name you want to give it. But you're not succinct. You're not condensing any of your thoughts. And so you're trying to shove all of the conscious mind down the throat of the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind will be completely lost as to what your point is. So you really have to take whatever it is that's your concern in life, and you have to really condense it down into something which is very short and very simple, that you could say to a child and the child would be able to remember it. And that's a good way to think of the subconscious mind. It's very powerful, but very simplistic. And so you have to condense your prayer. Just a few words, if possible, just a few lines, very, very simple. I need help, or I need a blessing, or I need grace, or I need support. Whatever it is that you're asking from the higher self, it has to be very, very succinct. You have to be clear on what your intent is. I want $1 million is not, first of all, you probably don't believe that God's going to hand you $1 million tomorrow, right? And so you have to believe in the prayer. You have to be congruent with your prayer. You have to not be doubting yourself so heavily that your doubt gets in the way, because the subconscious will reject what you completely doubt. So if you have some faith that you can get some help from the higher self, that's good. That will allow you to pass the prayer through the subconscious mind. The other thing that Ken Keyes Jr. was so clear about was that you wanted to use all of your emotion to really drive the affirmation into the subconscious mind and hopefully float it through and into the higher self. So if we were to put that into brainwave terminology, you're passing it through alpha, through theta, through delta, back up into gamma. And that's a really kind of a circuitous route, right? It's a strange thing, but it keeps showing up over and over again, and I really believe it's a very deep truth, and it's not exactly intuitive, but it's experiential. And that is, to get to the higher self, we have to pass through the subconscious mind. And so that makes the route kind of a down and then back up. And that is fascinating. So we'll talk more and more about that. But for prayer, just imagine you have to pass the prayer, you have to pass the affirmation, whatever it is, you have to pass it through the subconscious mind and get to the other side, which is the gamma brainwave, which is the higher self, okay? And that makes the process of affirmation and prayer very, very powerful if you can take that understanding home and really run with it. It's very, very powerful. And the Kahuna really understood this very deeply, because they would have their totem poles. And at the top of the totem pole would be the higher self. So that would be a face at the top of the totem pole. Might be represented by a bird, showing that it's flying above. It's very above, right? And then below that would be you, the conscious self, right? So that would be a face in the center of the totem. And then down below would be a third face, and that is the subconscious. And so in the Kahuna lore, they would tell you, you have to go to the lower self, and then the lower self will speak to the higher self. But you can't get there from the conscious up into the higher self. And that's what we're trying to do a lot of times in prayer, in affirmation, and in meditation, is that our understanding is not clear, and so we're trying to skip the subconscious, and you can't skip it. You have to pass through it. So the way that looks in meditation is that you need to pass into a trance. You need to experience the alpha, the theta, the delta brainwaves and pass through those to get to gamma. And the way that works in prayer and affirmation is that you have to keep it succinct, you have to keep it powerful, so you can float it through the subconscious mind into the gamma brainwave. And that's when really big changes happen very, very rapidly. Now, if you only get it into the subconscious mind, it may float around in the subconscious mind for a while, and then the higher self will pick it up. That's a little bit of a longer process, but that also happens. So I was modeling this particular Kahuna, and she was really amazing. People would come to her to heal their future. And it was really amazing. She would sit down with you for a long period of time, like an hour or maybe 2 hours, and she would ask you, what is in the way of this thing that you want in your future? What's in the way? What's in the way? What's in the way? And she would help you to clear all of those imagined obstacles so that the way seemed very clear and open to you. And then she would call on the higher self, and actually she would communicate with the higher self. She would get feedback, and she would say, okay, it's gonna happen. And it worked. So while I was modeling this Kahuna, she talked about the Akua, which is their word for the higher self. And if you listen to it, it sounds a lot like Om, doesn't it? So it's a very universal thing we're talking about. But you can give it any name that you like. You can call it God, you can call it the higher self, you can call it Mama Mary, you can call it Divine Mother. Whatever works for you, Krishna, Buddha, whoever you would like. Whatever pure and unbiased representative you would like to name it. And that point that she was talking about, she would say it's behind us and above us, right? And that's a really kinesthetic way to access a certain part of the brain. So the Indians have a name for this point on the back of the skull. They call it the Bindu, not to be confused with the Bindu here. So this point, which is above and before, again, it's just a kinesthetic way of accessing a particular part of your brain. And that part of your brain is above the Ajna chakra. So if you look at the brain, you can see that there's the medulla, and then on top of the medulla is the midbrain, and then there's the fornix, and on. It stacks right up into the pineal gland. The pineal gland is really amazing because it's the only part of the brain which is one. Everything else is dual. Even the pituitary gland is dual. It has 2 halves. The brain has 2 halves, but strangely the pineal is one. Very interesting, right? So it could be by imagining above and before that we are accessing that one thing which is one, which would be the pineal gland. Could be. So you want to imagine that point, and you want to connect. So you want to communicate, and you want to try and get a fellow feeling with that point. So if you're going to call it Akua, if you're going to call it Divine Mother, whatever it is, you want to get a fellow feeling. You want to feel as if there's a connection, as if there's an energy conduit between you and that point in the brain, that point of the higher self, that channel of communication. You want to open that channel and feel like there's a connection. To do that, you can use a little bit, you can use your imagination, but more importantly, you want to be using your heart mind. You want to feel that connection between yourself and the higher self. So for this process that I modeled from this Kahuna that I want to share with you, we're going to take your prayer, make it very succinct, make it very clear, make your intention for help very clear, and then you want to float that into the higher self, okay? So you just give it into the higher self, and then you're going to use your breath to push energy into the higher self. So you're going to imagine that with the Ha breath, you're going to push the Ha breath into that point, that channel, into the higher self. And that looks like this. So I'm going to do it with the mouth open so you can hear the Ha, but as you become confident that the throat is constricted, you no longer need to use the ha with an open mouth. You can do it nasally. So that's a process, and you have to work your way into that. So to begin, you can use an open mouth. That's fine. But eventually, you want to be able to do the ha breath with a closed mouth using a nasal breath only. It's very much more efficient for the body, so it's very important. Okay, so you're just going to float your intention, very succinct, just a small prayer, whatever it is. I need help, I need blessing, bless this person, bless my family, whatever it is. Make sure it's very succinct, very short. The intent is very clear what you're asking for. Float that into the higher self, and then push the ha breath into the higher self. So now I'm trying to show you what I'm doing with my mind, with my hand, but of course you don't need your hand to push the, you could. So if it helps you to use your hand, you can use your hand, but you don't need to. So you just want to imagine that you're sending the ha breath into the higher self. And it's like a bowl or a cup, and you're filling up the higher self with the breath. And what the Kahuna said was that the higher self does not have this breath, and you do. So you are transferring your energetic breath into the higher self. The higher self has a higher energy, and so you are feeding the higher self so it can then use the higher energy to create change in your life. It's a very loose theory, but it's a very good theory. So let's give it a shot. So as you're pushing the ha breath into the higher self, you want to keep that channel of communication open. You want to feel the response from the higher self, if there is a response. And at some point, it may click for you that the higher self is full of that breath, that you have filled the bowl. So that takes a little practice, right? And the beautiful thing is, by using the breath, you are making that connection very strong between you and the higher self. You're strengthening that connection. And it's going to make this process of using your heart mind to feel that connection, to feel the higher self, much more easy and accessible. It could be that's what the whole process is about, is establishing that connection. So you just want to keep breathing the ha breath into the higher self until the bowl is full, and you will feel, you will just get a feeling that the bowl is full, that the cup is full, and you don't need to send any more breath, and you will feel a confirmation from the higher self that everything is okay now, that it's going to be okay now. And it might take 5 minutes, it might take 10 minutes of breath, it might take 15 minutes. You might need to do it several times, but it's a really powerful process. And when you feel that confirmation from the higher self, it can be just a whisper of a thought that it's okay. You might just know it. Whatever happens, this is a good reason to meditate. We want to be present with what we're doing. We want to be aware, we want to be mindful of what's going on so that we can hear that message. And it's probably just going to be a feeling or a knowing that everything's okay now. And that's the process. Then you forget about it, which is another key point about prayer. You just want to forget about it at that point. Just let it be. as well as you can. Just let it go. We should be doing the practical things in our lives that can help us, of course. That's why we have hands and limbs and brains, right? But as far as worrying about it continuously, we can just let it go and let God pick some of our slack up, you know? This is His world, right? When people would come to Lahiri Mahasaya about their problems, he would tell them to meditate, he would pray for them, and then he would tell him, let him worry whose problem it is. Isn't that beautiful? Let him worry whose problem it is. Your troubles, you know, we should be doing our best, right? But in the end, the troubles are not our troubles. The troubles are the creator of this whole universe, right? This whole galaxy. In the end, it's their problem, and we shouldn't stress ourselves out too badly. Because it's like a rocking chair, it never takes you anywhere. I hope you enjoyed this process. More importantly, I hope you give it a shot. Give it a try, see how it works for you. You know, some of us are not so heart-oriented, so using deep emotion in prayer can be foreign to us. So this process allows us to use the breath to make that connection with the higher self. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell down there so you get notified when I have another video coming out. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you next time.